Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good afternoon, and welcome to WCAT Radio and this edition of Inter Vitam at Mortem, Between Life and Death, interviews and discussion with the Catholic bioethicist. I am your host, Dr. Anne Urlakis. I'm classically trained and degreed in bioethics, and today I'm pleased to have an opportunity to interview Mr. Rick Taetsch to discuss his work in hospice. Before launching into today's show, let's begin as we always do with the prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Dear God, our Heavenly Creator, you are the author of life and of truth, the reality that you will each and every human person into being, created from the moment of conception, bearing the dignity and imprint of your own image and likeness within the very essence of our being, is a mystery beyond human understanding. Please help us to have a greater appreciation of the gift of being created in your image and likeness. Help us to reverence that reality in our brothers and sisters, especially in the most vulnerable among them. Help us to defend the sanctity of every human life from conception to natural death. Through the intercession of Our Lady, the Blessed Virgin Mary, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Again, welcome to this week's WCAT broadcast of Inter Vitam at Mortem, Between Life and Death, interviews and discussion with the Catholic bioethicist. Throughout January, we focused many of the Inter Vitam at Mortem broadcasts on the subject of the beginnings of human life and the ethical considerations relating to the unborn. This week we're going to shift gears and we're going to focus on the other end of the spectrum of human life. This week we're going to talk about the natural end of life, preparing for eternity. And with that, I'm pleased to have as my guest, my friend, Mr. Rick Taetsch. Rick and I have known each other for a number of years, and I am often in awe of the tremendous impact he has through his work of volunteering at a local inpatient hospice center. So welcome, Rick. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Well, thank you for those kind words. I appreciate it, and I'm just so blessed that God has sent me down this journey to volunteer in hospice, and it has been a wonderful journey. And this will be the beginning of the sixth year, and I can tell you that at the beginning of this journey, it was recommended by my deacon Ron that I should go to hospice, and I thought he knew I was sick, and I didn't. And he suggested that I should go there and volunteer, and I suggested to him that I'm not sure that he was thinking properly. And it took me about 3 months to get there. I prayed about it, I thought about it, I talked about it, and then I went over there to sort of inquire, and the rest is sort of history, but it has evolved into much more than just hospice. It's revolved into many other entities of it that we can certainly talk about as we go along. So, Marianne, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. So this was certainly not something on your radar, but you were open to the suggestion, sort of. And, as I've known you for these years, that's one of the things that strikes me about who you are. You were forever open to the will of God in your life, and that is such a breath of fresh air. So this, you've mentioned this was not something that was on your radar. This is not one of those, boy, I always felt I wanted to do this moments.
Well, that's true. A bucket list, this would not be on it.
Okay.
But a bucket list without this, knowing what I've been through, would have been a significant waste. As you know, we've talked about some of the things that have happened along the way, and I am just eternally blessed to be able to to be in this environment and to be able to witness and see circumstances and spiritual happenings that, for the end of life, are remarkable in my way of thinking. And in the time that I've spent with the staff there at Hospice, some of them have been there 25, 30 years, and I got to give them an awful lot of credit for being able to be in this environment. And I say environment, meaning that there are some of the patients that come in, their prognosis for a long-term life, of course, is sometimes a couple weeks, others a couple days, sometimes 12 hours. It just depends. And some of the patients that come in for a couple of weeks, you get to know them more on a personal basis. You get to know their families. You get to talk about their lives, and it is so worthwhile to. I'm not the only one that does this. I'm the only man that works in that facility or volunteers in that facility, other than a doctor that comes through and the patient's family that are men. I'm the only man that's there, and I only say that because the women who worked there before, and I work there now, obviously, they have said to me, "Oh my goodness, we've never had a man in here, and we don't know how to respond to that."
I remember when you told me that 6 years ago, when you first began, and you had the suggestion, and you were thinking about doing it. And I was going over this, before Christmas, thinking, wow, it really has been about 6 years. And I remember you saying that when you volunteered, they were thrilled. A guy here. Not just someone who can lift the boxes and do the physical things that we need as a volunteer, but a guy who can relate to these patients coming from a very different point of view, and just how valuable that is. And
I think that I don't think there was anybody who could predict the circumstances and situations and the love and care and just pure, loving, heartfelt comments made by people because of things that have happened there that I have been able to witness and also stand around and go, oh my goodness, this is just amazing. And if I can reflect on the beginning story,
sure.
Day one when I went to Hospice, that particular day they had the facility was full, and everybody was quite busy. And when I signed up to come in that particular day, they were going to give me sort of a mentor to go along with and show me some of the things that that I should do. And that particular day, things were just a lot of things going on, and that person was very busy. So I just took it upon myself to just go around and do things that seemed to be logical that should be done. Simple things like making coffee and making cookies and picking up here or there, or go filling the supply cart. Not that I've ever been trained on that, but it just seemed like logical things to do. And things calmed down after a couple 3 hours, and the nurse in charge said to me, she said, I seem to be getting along quite well. I wonder if you'd do us a favor and go down and see the patient in the end room. And I went, wait a second, on the first day, you want me to go see a patient? Is someone else coming down with me? No, you'll go down there. She said, but we got to tell you something about her first. She's 92 years old, 93 years old, whatever it happened to be. She's blind. And she's been here for a little while. So here I go. I'll go down there and see what happens. No formal training, didn't know what to expect, didn't know anything about how sick she was or what her illness was. And so I walk into the room and announce myself. And, of course, she's seated up in bed, and she said, well, who are you? And I said, well, I'm a volunteer. She goes, we don't have any men volunteers here. I said, well, I'm new here, and this is my first day, and would you mind? I'd like to sit down and chat with you for a few minutes. And she said, well, that would be fine. And so I sat with her and started to ask her just basic questions because I didn't know anything about her other than her age and that she was blind. And she was becoming sort of she didn't particularly like me asking basic questions, I guess. I was, where did you live? What do you have a family? How many children do you have? How many grandchildren? Just kind of things that I could kind of use to develop a conversation. Asked her what faith she was, and that's quite frankly the only question I really got answered. And she happened to be a Catholic, as I am. And so she crosses her arms and got this real stern look on her face. I'll never forget it. And she looked at me. She goes, "Why are you asking me all these questions?" And I thought, oh boy, this is not going well at all. I said, "I'm sorry, I'll leave." And I said to her, "Well, I wanted to find something about you so that we could talk." And she said, "Well, all right then." And so the next question I asked her where she went on vacation. And then she told me I wouldn't have any idea where it was. Now, in my mind, I am not a worldly traveler, so I was thinking she's going to tell me about some island somewhere in the South Pacific or out in wherever, and I wouldn't know anything about it. So she said, "Well, I vacation in Ontonagon." And I said to her, "Ontonagon, Michigan?" She goes, "How did you know that?" And I said, "Well, I am from Upper Michigan." She goes, "You are not." "Well, I'm sorry, I am." And then she started to quiz me because she felt that I was tricking her, and she started to quiz me about what is in Ontonagon. Well, I know Ontonagon pretty well. And then I asked her a couple of questions about Upper Michigan. And from that point on, it was like Katie bar the door. I sat there with her, and we talked about so many things for like an hour and a half. And then I said to her, oh, in the meantime, the nurses would come down to the doorway, and they would either give me a thumbs up or thumbs down to find out if things were going along okay. And I would always give her a thumbs up. And so, hour and a half, I found out, as I said, she was Catholic, and she'd love to have communion. She loves to say the rosary. And I said, well, okay, anytime that I come back, I'll be happy to say the rosary with you. I'm happy to bring you communion and do those kind of things. And subsequent times, visits back, which were many because she was there a little longer than most. I said the rosary with her, and I prayed with her. She had family, but they were in California. And it was a very nice relationship between her, but get back to that first day. So I leave her room, go down to the front desk, and the nurse in charge says to me, well, Rick, how did it go? I said, well, it was a little rough at first, but it worked out all right. I said, she looks forward to me coming back to bring communion and stuff. And she goes, well, I better go down there and check on her because, she's might be a little funny. You're the only man that's ever been in her room other than the doctor, and I'll check to make sure everything was okay. So in about 5 minutes, she comes back. In the meantime, there's like 5 or 6 nurses in that nurses station, and the nurse in charge is kind of laughing, and she goes, you're not going to believe what she said. And I said, well, I don't know. What could she have said that was so funny? She goes, well, remember, she's a blind lady. I said, yes, I remember she's blind. The only thing she wanted to know was the guy in here sitting there talking with me, was he cute?
Ah!
Well, oh my goodness. She's 92 years old and wants to know if I'm cute. And so that was the beginning of a wonderful relationship. She did pass away, and one of the requests, which was so adorable, is she asked that if I would be so kind to serve at her funeral.
Oh, wow.
And I was very happy to do it. And she was she was my first, let's say, and there hasn't been anybody like her. And we had wonderful conversations. I would bring in my iPad often, and she would say to me, that thing you got there with you, that you always bring in. She says, read something out of that thing. And I would say, you want to do some different prayers? Yeah, mix them up. Get some different ones. And, the internet has so many different options that you can use. And she just loved to sit there and just listen to me read different prayers out of the iPad. And she'd have communion and we'd say the rosary. And she was just, those kind of things. The nice thing about her and many of the other people that I've witnessed over the last 5+ years is that the patients who come in and the families who come in that have faith, that believe in God, are so much more at ease and at peace with their end of life experience, at least in my opinion. And I for the life of me am so troubled by when you walk into a room and you can feel and you can sense that the patient or the family is not concerned about God one bit.
Okay.
And that is so, well, it is upsetting to me. But that's I'm not there to convert them. That's not my
right.
place. But I'm just so disappointed that that's where they're at in their life, and even though it's the end of life for them, that it's God's plan. But that being said, too, may I give you another story about an end of life experience where a person had no faith, at least in my opinion, and there was a remarkable change as the end of life came to that man. Can I relay that story to you?
Sure. Before you do, let's just take one step back for the listeners. I just want to convey, I'm not sure, I hope everyone understands when we're talking hospice, what hospice is. But hospice is a philosophy of care, and where you volunteer is a center in the United States where individuals, patients, come when they have been certified that they probably have less than 6 months left to live. And in medicine, we have 2 pathways for treatment. We have the cure-all treatment, where aggressive medical interventions are used to try and arrest a disease process, to try and create a cure. In hospice and in palliative care, there is a shift. There is the recognition that there is not going to be a cure, that in hospice that there is going to be a death. And the focus shifts away from the cure pathway to the care pathway. There is nothing that is done to hasten that death, but there is also nothing that is done to prevent that death. And so what is focused on is making the life that is left a good life, doing everything one can to meet the spiritual, physical, psychological needs of the individual and of their family to whatever degree is possible. So it is not just a focus on death, but it is a focus on the life that is there. And from what you're telling me, you do such a beautiful job bridging that time. So go ahead with your story.
Well, to expand on what you just said, Marianne, it is important to note that I'm not a professional at this in any way. I've not been trained in any schooling or given anything extra as far as additional master's degree training. But the hospice center that I'm a volunteer at is they provide comfort for the patient, and the comfort may be a massage, a body rub with oils. They may give you aromatherapy. They may, and they do, they have visits from outside individuals who bring in dogs who will come to a room, and depending upon the patient's condition, they can either pet or talk with about dog or that kind of thing. And, an aspirin is given by the staff, comfort things, food is provided, drinks are provided, non-alcohol, I might add. I take that back. The patient smuggles alcohol in sometimes, but that's another story. And there are things that are done to make their life, the remainder of their life, easier for all. They do require, at times, technical care that the family can't provide. And most of the time, when you say 6 months, the facility that I work with, the patients usually aren't there more than 6 weeks, depending upon the standards that they use to accept a patient to come in there. It's kind of sort of changes sometimes, meaning that depending upon the illness of the patient, they know that they may not last 24 hours.
Sure.
And so the patients are provided with, and the families are provided with, really a real homey environment. And each patient has their own room, a seating area. Some patients are ambulatory. Some actually are able to walk in on their own, and care begins. But one of the things that if we want to draw back to the faith part of this, and the story I was going to relate to you was that it just so happens that I have been resurrected in my faith, 6 years ago or so, and because of the death of a dear friend. And all of this happens for a reason. God has a plan. I truly believe in that. Jesus, I trust in you. It's unequivocal. And so, getting back to the sense that I get in in conversation with patients and with families, that you can tell when the patient doesn't have a real value in God, and some have their own reasons and legitimate to them, their own excuse for it. That's not for me to decide. That's not where I'm going. There was a man who came in who was the crankiest, orneriest person you ever wanted to see. And he made life miserable for anybody who walked in the room. But you still tried to provide for him some sort of care. He never wanted you in the room. He never wanted you to talk with him. Leave me alone. Those kind of things. And you still, you brought in his meals and you took care of different things. But he was a hardcore, and he was a pretty rough man. He had a pretty rough life. He lost a upper body extremity through no fault of his own. He had no family, and so he was struggling, and so he was approaching his end of his life, and I wasn't there for this, but they told me this because they knew, the nurses told me this, they knew that I would want to hear this. And it started on day one, and this day one meaning in the third day he passed away. Day one, he rang the nurse station, and they came down, which is unusual. He never asked for anybody to come down. They came down, and he said, I want you to know, he said, the lady was here. And they went, what lady? Well, the lady that came in the room. And they said, well, we don't know who you're talking about. Yeah, she was just here. She was dressed in white. And they said, well, okay, fine, all right. And what did she say? Well, she'll be back. All right. So they went down at the desk and said, well, we didn't know what that was about. Day two came along almost the same time. the bell rings and went down there and came in the room and, can we help you? And he said, yeah, that lady was back again. She just wants to make sure that I know that she's coming back and be prepared that I'm coming back. And he said this time there were two ladies there. Really? What'd they look like? Well, they were just kind of in the white robes, and they were just kind of up in the air a little bit. Oh, really? And so the nurses had told me about this, and they said, this is so strange because it's just for a person with that attitude, well, what's going on here? And the third day came along, and lo and behold, there three nurses went down to the room this time, and they said, well, can we help you with? And he said, well, I just want you to know there's three of those ladies back. They're right up there in the corner. And they all went, well, we don't see them. And he said, well, that's okay. He said, we were talking here, and they decided that it's time for me to go. And you know what? I'm going. And he passed away. And all of those three nurses were just flummoxed by the fact that here is this crusty, old, codgered man who decided, through God's plan, that it was time for him to move on to the next life. And they said he was so peaceful at it. He was so, laid back. And they said, this is one for the books. We want to make sure people know about this. And when they told me this story, I went, oh my goodness, who would have thought that man would have had a life of misery, pain, and antagonized everybody he was near, and his life at the end became such a joy. So there is faith. There is people who see the light, and I'm glad for him. I really am.
Wow. May he rest in peace. May his memory be eternal. That's incredible. That is absolutely incredible. You touched on one of the questions that I had actually prepared and wanted to ask you about. You are one of the most joyful people I know. You are a go-getter, as you said at the beginning. You got there, no formal training. You just stepped in and you did what needed to be done. Coffee needed to be made, storage closet needed to be dealt with, supplies needed to be dealt with. You step in and you do what needs to be done, and you do it with joy. As long as I've known you, there has been a joy. You've got a remarkable sense of humor. We've talked about hospice, both as the philosophy and as the building, as the place, as the actual physical center, and the joy that you see there. How do you keep your joy?
Well, that's an interesting question. I believe that God's given me the ability, regardless of a particular circumstance, is that I always look at the positive side of it. I always look at the plus side of it. And there are all of these journeys that, there's the ones that I've mentioned so far, and there are others. Somebody said to me a few years ago, Rick, you know what you ought to do? You ought to write a book.
Yeah. Because
you've had so many circumstances. And I said, no, I wouldn't be the one to write this book. I mean, look at all of these nurses who have been here for so many years. Yes, but we're just not the same as you are. We're doing our professional situation, and you come as a volunteer, and you bring a whole different approach to this. And it's something that quite frankly we don't see all the time. And I'm not please don't misunderstand. I am not bragging. I'm saying.
Oh no, I agree.
But
that is one of the reasons why I wanted you on the show to talk about this. You're right. There is a difference between those who have been professionally trained, who have purposefully gone into this as a profession, as a vocation, as a career, and you who got called to it. And a little reluctantly at the beginning, this was not on your bucket list.
Nope.
You do it as a volunteer. You could step away at any time, but you don't. This has become a part of who you are, to the point where, as you mentioned to me, you can be out having a fish fry with your wife and get that call that there is a patient that just won't settle down and is asking for you, and you'll go in.
Well, that's a circumstance. I think when I told you that story, and my wife and I still chuckled about that. I was driving back it was a Friday night. I was driving back from a fish fry in a city probably an hour and a half from us. We went to see some relatives and had a fish fry, and the phone rings, and you know, hello, and that sort of thing. And it's about 10 o'clock at night, and they say who they are, and I said, yeah, what can I help you with? And they said, well, we know you had some pretty good luck the last couple of days with this patient, and we're not having any luck with her tonight. Is there any chance you'd have some time to stop by and maybe see if we can calm her down a little bit? And I said, well, you know, I can't guarantee you. I'm not a miracle worker. I'll stop in and see. And one of the things we chuckle about is my wife said to me, you know, if I didn't hear this conversation, I would be very, very suspicious of you getting a phone call at 10 o'clock at night saying, come on over to hospice because we need you. And, you know, we've chuckled about that a couple of times. But that particular patient, she had a lot of anxiety. Her faith was, along with her anxiety, she had dementia. So she was a really troubled patient. And very nice lady, and I would sit and talk with her for an hour or so, you know, almost every day for quite some time. And when I was in the room with her, she just tended to, I don't know why, she tended to be very relaxed. She wasn't jumping around. She wasn't, you know, antsy. She would lay in bed and just kind of listen and talk. And she, many times, I can recall that we had some really serious conversations, and I walked out of there and went, wow, I didn't know she had that left. You know, there's this kind of energy and this kind of understanding. So that particular evening, I went in there, and when I got there, she was down by the nurse's station, and they were really they didn't want to medicate her, but they just didn't have enough time to really do much with her. So I asked her if she wanted to go down the room with me. So we went down to her room, and she proceeded to get up in bed, and I put the sides of the bed up, and I sat in a chair, and we started talking. And in the meantime, she was a little bit more anxious than most times, and I reached out and I held her hand, and we just talked, but I kept her hand in my hand. I had him by both my hands, and she just, I could see her. She went from this very tense, above the pillow position to gradually sinking back into the pillow, you know, with the pillow kind of wrapped around her ears, and she was no longer grasping my hand like this was the last thing she was going to do. She was relaxed, and we chatted about this and chatted about that, and we talked about the fish fry, and probably an hour and a half later, she said, you know, I think I'm tired. I'm going to go to sleep. And she did. She fell asleep, and I mean, she didn't pass away. She just fell asleep. But I left there, and I went out to the nurse's station, and they said, we don't even want to know how you do that. And I said, I didn't do anything. I just walked in there and started talking with her. And, you know, a few days later, she passed away. But and I don't mean to be so cavalier with that, but, you know, death is inevitable when you're working with hospice patients. But it was so interesting to be able to just be there. And again, going back to the Deacon Ron said to me, you should be in hospice, and I kid you not, what do I know? Turns out that he perceived things and was aware of things that work in there, and I am blessed that it has happened that way. And then the other thing I will tell, and I know, Marianne, you know about this, but the starting of the Dahlia Garden is another little boy I would have never.
I was just about to bring that up. Great, yeah. I launched into the Dahlia Garden. How God moved you in this direction to bring joy to these individuals. It's just incredible. Explain the Dahlia Garden.
Well, that Dahlia Garden started strictly by accident. I purchased them at a store, the Dahlia bulbs. They're called tubers, but for this case, let's just say bulbs. I purchased them at a store, and I brought them home and planted them in my backyard. And you'd never grown
dahlias before, right?
No, I didn't. I haven't grown flowers ever in my life. And my wife, again, suggested to me that there had been something wrong with me if I'm planting flowers in our backyard, and that you didn't know anything about flowers. And I said, yeah, I know, but they look really nice in the package. I want to plant them and see what it looks like. And one of the things that I wanted color. I wanted a lot of variety of color. And if anybody's not familiar with dahlias, there's 367,000, kid you not, varieties of dahlias. So there's all kinds of them, from size to, big, small, little, to different configurations, colors. Oh, it's just amazing. It's so beautiful if you're not familiar with dahlias. But so I planted these flowers, and it happened to be the beginning of my hospice volunteer part. And dahlias, when you cut them, they produce even more. So if you cut one, in about 2 weeks later, you're going to have 3 more flowers. And if you keep cutting them, they'll keep coming even more. So I had so many flowers, I didn't know what to do with them. The neighbors had them, all the kids had them, those kind of things. So I said, well, what the heck, I'll bring them to hospice. And when I started to bring them into hospice, I was just flabbergasted of how that affected not only the staff, but the patients and the families. And I the end of the year was there, and that was the end of that. And so I decided, again, I took the bull by the horns, if we can say that, and I decided that I'm going to plant a garden the following year. The hospice facility has a large acreage of land. So I went to the management and I said, well, the dahlias were pretty well received last year. I want to do something more. You got a piece of land that I can plant on, and I want to put flowers here at hospice, and then I don't have to bring them from home and do that kind of stuff. And so they gave me a small plot, which was fine. That was my first year of doing massive ones, and I think I planted 50 or 60 dahlias at that time. And oh my goodness, we just had, and I don't know anything about flowers again, and we had a lot of flowers, and we just had amazing responses from patients and families, and that my whole purpose was to bring color within the hospice. Not that it was doom and gloom in hospice, but there wasn't enough color. I wanted reds and blues.
And these are so vibrant. I've been the blessed recipient of many of them. And the large ones are between the size of a nice-sized dessert plate, almost a dinner plate size.
Yes.
The small ones, teacup size. They are gorgeous. The folds, the intricacies of, and the variegation in the colors. The colors are vibrant. They are so beautiful and so symmetrically perfect. In each one of them is different. It just, when you think about the transcendentals, goodness, truth, and beauty, you look at these and you're captivated by the beauty that's there, and like stepping into a fine cathedral or beautiful church, it automatically elevates your mind to who created it. You look at this and you think, wow, there was a creator for this, and there's a creator for me. It just goes hand in hand.
Yeah, I started this out of a whim. Again, God's plan. He knew what he was doing. And he knew that, my history and his history to direct me was, once I get on a project, I'm Katie bar the door. I'm after it. And I tend to be very motivated, self-motivated on these different things that I start and get into. And the garden has now evolved. Last year's garden, I planted 160 plants. We have two special areas. We have an area right by the hospice center itself. It's right in the hospital, almost courtyard. And we developed it. When I say we, I had to get their permission to do this, and we moved sidewalks so that we could, if a patient is wheelchair accessible, we made it wheelchair accessible, and then if someone wants to walk out, if they care to, they can walk out and sort of go in a U-shaped to look at the garden in all the way around. And the other thing that I did is, for those people who, maybe the patient's family, I made enough room in between the rows so that if they want to go in and cut the flowers, they're welcome to. Some do, some don't. But they when it's in full bloom in the season, the nurses tend to tell the patients and the family, just wait till about 11. Rick will be here. He'll give you all the flowers you want. And the reception of, you walk into a room with a vase full of flowers, yellows and the creams and the oranges and the purples. It's amazing, as Marianne has mentioned, that there's so many different varieties, and that the brightness of the colors it's again, I never knew anything about dahlias before, and God said, you want to plant dahlias, Rick. That's what you want to do. And so I did. And so you walk into a room with a vase full of flowers. The family is, they're chatting and doing whatever, and you walk in and you just kind of stand there for a second, and the comment you'll hear, oh my goodness, those are beautiful. Where did you get those? Oh my goodness, what are those? And if you're not hearing it from the patients, you're hearing it from the family. And it's over and over again. And as I pass it to, if the patient is aware and capable of taking it, I always present it to the patient. These are for you.
Wow.
And invariably, they just, because I try to mix them up, make it 8 or 10 to a vase, and I never put a duplicate in it so that they can see the variety, they can see the different things that are available. And if they tell me that, oh, I love the yellow ones, well, if you'd like me to get you some yellow ones, I'll go out and get you some different yellow ones then. Or I like the purple ones. Fine, I'll go get you purple. I'd love to do that for them, because if that's what they want, I want to make sure that they get what they want. And
that is incredible.
It's so fascinating to me that God has challenged me. People ask me, why do you do this? I said, well, God put me in charge of his garden, so I got to take care of it.
Right.
So I've had the response from patients, from the families of patients, and don't forget the staff. There are days that it's a very difficult job.
I bet.
And there are days that their management does not want them to take any flowers home. Well, I'm in charge of the flowers, and when I see things are not good, and things are, it's a bad day for folks. When they leave, they'll find dahlias in the backseat of their car, or I give it to them at work, and I say, you take them home because those are for me. This isn't coming out of the kettle here at Hospice. It's for you. You take them home and you enjoy them. And it's they both men and women just enjoy them immensely. There's so many little stories that have come out of that too. That again, when we talked before about things that God has provided to us, and the stories that come out of this. I had a patient, and her daughter was with her most of the time that she was in hospice, and her mother would come out, and when her daughter wasn't there, and she'd come out and talk to me while I'd be cutting the flowers, and she would tell me, "Oh, I love those flowers. Those are so beautiful. I wish I would have planted those when I was younger," and so on and so forth. And as she became less capable of coming out of the room, I would, bring her flowers and talk with her and stuff. And her daughter was there quite often with her, and the lady ultimately passed away. But her daughter sent me a little note, and if you allow me, I'll read it. It's a thank you note, and it says, "Dear Rick, I want to thank you for bringing the vase of dahlias to my mom's room. The last time she woke, and an hour before she passed away, I brought the flowers over to her, and she smiled and said, 'Aren't they beautiful?'"
Oh, wow.
She was looking forward to seeing more bloom, but that's not the case. I just want you to know that this summer, which should be this coming summer, she said, the daughter went out and ordered dahlias as per my suggestion, and I will plant flowers for my mother for the rest of my life.
Wow.
So I thought it was just dahlias. It's not just dahlias.
It's not just dahlias. It's not.
No, it's not.
You're putting your finger on a spot right there that is healing the hurt. You and I have talked about this, and I said it is not coincidence that you are God's gardener. You look at the Garden of Eden, you look at the Garden of Gethsemane, you look at the Mary Magdalene mistaking our Lord for the gardener at the resurrection, and just how many times in sacred tradition, scripture, the garden is a metaphor and a real image, and just what you're being called to do. And it is through the flowers, the simple act of these beautiful flowers, that God is bringing healing to these lives. Not the kind of healing that we look for in medicine in terms of healing the disease and a cure. You're bringing healing to their lives so that for those who are ready to step across the threshold to eternity, they do so with peace and joy. And for those that are left behind, they also are able to heal with peace. And you've just been this wonderful instrument of God's love. The spiritual, corporal works of mercy right there in action.
Yes, I'm not a medical professional, and even in my TV job, I don't report to be one. But, and I mean that kiddingly.
I know.
It's fascinating to me that it has evolved into this, and what we've talked about so far. I can relay another little story that, if you don't mind.
Oh, please do.
And it's flower related, and I find out when I get there on any given day. I found out how many patients are in the rooms, and I always bring them flowers, new flowers every day. in season, of course. And so in this particular day, there was a new patient in, and they never tell me anything about him because they know I'm going to find out anyway. And it's kind of interesting. And you start a conversation, and you find out things that may or may not be better or worse than what the nurse would tell you. But so this particular lady, I walked into her room, and she was up in bed, and she looks at me and she goes, "Why are you here?" I said, "Oh, I was going to bring you these flowers." And she goes, "Oh, those are really beautiful." And she said, "What are they?" And we started a conversation and told her where they were, and real feisty woman. And in fact, I my first thought is I wasn't even so sure that this was a woman because I thought it was a drill sergeant. She had, and perhaps she smoked a carton of cigarettes a day and drank a fifth of whiskey a day because she had that deep, raspy voice. And she could have easily been a drill sergeant and in basic training in any one of the service professions. And she had this voice that was hard to forget. Very feisty and witty, and she was quite comical. So I didn't really think much of it other than the fact that she was a wild one. And so I left the flowers there, and so I was going to put them on a nightstand off to the side, and she made some use of a derogatory term, and she said, "I can't see them over there. Put them up here by the table." Okay, fine. I'll be happy to. So here's the flowers. It's on one of those tables that extend over the bed where they eat off of, or they have a book or something on it. And so I went back to the nurse's station, and I went, "Wow, that lady down there she's an interesting personality." "Yeah," they said, she's quite feisty. And I said, "Rick, do you know how old she is?" I went, "I don't know. You could pretty much guess she's between 80 and 90, and you wouldn't be too far off." And they said, "Well, no, she's 106 years old."
Oh, my
I went,
goodness.
What the heck? 106 years old? You got to be kidding me. No, she's 106. Oh, my goodness, that's even more fascinating to have her, talk the way she did. And okay, so I thought that was sort of the end of the story. So the next day I come in, and they said, "Rick, before you do anything, we got to talk to you." And I went, "Oh, okay, what happened now?" "Well, you remember that lady yesterday?" "Yeah." "Well, which one was that?" And they said, the 106-year-old. I said, yeah, sure I do. Why? "Oh," and I was thinking, she passed away. "No, it wasn't that she passed away." They said, "We got to tell you what she's saying to everybody about you." And I went, "Really? What possibly could she be saying?" "Well, anybody who comes in the room," she says, "look at these beautiful flowers. Aren't these beautiful? Look at the color of this and look at the size of this." She goes, "This old man brought me flowers yesterday."
Oh, that's lovely.
So I'm thinking, there is something that I could say that I think in my mind about her saying that, and I would never repeat it, but I think to myself, "You son of a gun, you." But anyway,
that is great.
So for the subsequent times that I would bring flowers to her each day, she would turn and look at me, and she goes, "You're that old man who always brings me flowers." I said, "Yeah, I'm that old man that always brings you flowers." And I almost felt like telling her a couple of times, "Well, you're 106 years old, and you're calling me an old man? Come on."
That's hysterical.
Yeah, so that's another part of a vase full of flowers that she always and made a point to tell everybody that walked in that room, "Look at my flowers. Look how beautiful these were. And this old man brought them to me yesterday." And it's one of those things that stick. It's just, I never started out thinking that this would ever be the way it is. And I really want to tell you the other story too, that of the stories that I've told, there's always a lesson. I not necessarily know all the lessons about it and may never know. But there is one lesson in a story about dahlias that I'll never forget. And that is the time that I came into a room with a vase full of flowers. And the room was rather dark. Most of the time the windows are open, and the shades are open. This particular time it was dark. A little hard to see. The room was full. There was young family, grandchildren. There was children. There was adults. Turns out to be family members all in there. There had to be 10, 12 people in the room. And as I walked into the room, right to the right of me as I walked in, it turns out to be the husband of the woman who was in bed was there, and he said to me, I'm standing there with the flowers, kind of getting my eyes adjusted to the room, etc. And he said to me, how did you know? And I went, excuse me? He said, how did you know that my wife for 35 years every summer planted dahlias, and she loved dahlias? And he said, this is the only year she took sick in April, and she didn't get to plant her flowers. And when I turned to look at the family in the room, they were all crying. Well, it dawned on me that, two things. I didn't know she had dahlias before. But God did. God did. And I had no idea of any part of this. And so he took the dahlias from me, and he walked away. And his wife was nearing the end of life. And he said to her, look, honey, this man brought us dahlias. And when I walked into the room, I did notice that it was obvious that she was nearing the end of life. And by gosh, if she didn't smile. And that smile was such that whole family was in massive tears. And I thought to myself, well, there you go again. You screwed this thing up. And I was, so mesmerized by all of this. And the husband asked me if we could chat for a minute. And so we did. We went out in the hallway, and he said to me, my wife, unbeknownst to us, worked a job not the job, but it wasn't unbeknown to them. She worked for an employer like 30 years, and nobody knew that she drank, and her family didn't know that she drank. And she consequently died because of that. And I thought to myself, my goodness, beautiful family, and the alcoholism did its job. It destroyed her. And I thought, how sad. This is just terrible. And nobody knew it. And I'm not the judge here, but there are people that I understand that are able to get away with it, and nobody knows. And I told this story that I've just told you and your listeners to a church group. And I just felt I had to tell it. Something told me that I have to tell this story, and I've told it actually quite a few times. And as we speak, the first time I told it to the church group, I just told it, and much like I have here, and about 10 or 15 minutes after, everybody's sitting around having coffee and donuts and stuff, and this lady came up with me, and she said, do you mind if I talk with you for a minute? I said, sure. She said, can we go somewhere quietly? I went, sure, fine, no problem. She said, I know who that lady was. And I said, well, you may know, and I know who it was, but I'm never going to share who she was. No, she said, I'm not asking you to share that. She just said, I do know who that lady is. I said, well, okay, fine. She goes, I want to tell you who that lady is. I said, well, I'm never going to agree to the fact whether it is or isn't. She goes, right. She said, I am that lady. And I went, what? Tell me that again. She goes, I'm one of those drinkers. And she said, I don't want to die. And I didn't know what to say to her. And I just said, well, there is help available. And she walked away. Okay, well, it was about 6 weeks later. And that lady made a point to come up to me, and she said, I want you to know something. Yes. She goes, I haven't had a drink for 6 weeks. I've never went that long. I've never went that long. And I have people helping me. And I said, wow. Congratulations.
That's phenomenal.
God bless you. And another story just like that a person heard this story through a third party, and that person happened to be another woman. And because I'm active in church, I got a phone call one day, and this lady told me who she was, and I said yes, and remember the same church. I mean, I didn't know her. And she said, I'm really glad that you told the story about the alcoholic. And I went, oh, well, thank you. It wasn't my choice. I just felt like I had to tell her. She goes, I'm seeking help, and I'm getting it. And I went, what are you trying to tell me? She says, I have the same problem. And I went, oh, boy. So you just don't know, you never know. And it all started with a face full of dahlias. Can you imagine that?
Rick, that is incredible. I'm getting close to the end of this hour, and I hate to have to cut this off in a minute. I want you to come back. I want to do this again. There's so many subjects that I've got outlined here that we didn't even touch on.
Marianne, you like pain and suffering, don't you?
Oh, man, no, this is fabulous. I told you, you have got so much to share. Among the things that I want the listeners to see is you're an ordinary guy, and you said yes to God when He directed your life to do something. I also want to point out that the role of the Deacon Ron, in giving you that suggestion and being open. You know, how much do you want to bet as he's sitting there talking to you and God's asking him to say to you, yeah, suggest to him that he go do some volunteering in hospice. Deacon Ron is probably saying, oh, Lord, you're not going to ask me to open my mouth and say that. Really? You know, not this guy, right? Okay, I'm going to do it. But and just the ability to accept the suggestion that God's giving you and to run with it and to be that conduit of His grace. You and I had talked before, and we're not going to have time to get into it now because I know I'm going to have to end in a minute, about advice to give seminarians and men in formation, and hopefully we can do that on another show. But one of the things that you mentioned is that those who are not quite comfortable walk in and they don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. There's a tremendous vulnerability in going to see someone in hospice at times, because each of us can look at the person in that bed and realize that one day we'll be there too. And it requires you to take stock of yourself before and after you go in there. Well, you've given so many suggestions, and the greatest of those is just to be open to what God's asking you to do in that moment. And it really is. It is true. It's also true in my involvement as a volunteer. It has been amazing, and I thank you for allowing me to talk about it. I hope that there is some chuckles from some of the people who listen to this from what I've said, but I hope that they also give the hospice environment, as you point out, it's a tricky area. It's an end of life, as we talk about in KCs. They're always talking about
the beginning of life and all of that, while we're now talking about the end of life at KC's, because of the flowers. And I don't know that it's neglected. There's more and more interest in it, but I think sometimes that the concentration level of some of the people that are there, they could put a little bit more effort into it. But that's just my opinion as a lay person. But it is interesting. And here I am. I'm the guy planting flowers and volunteering at Hospice. Who would have thought?
Gardner. That is incredible. And thank you for what you do. Thank you for that openness. Thank you for bearing witness and being willing to come on this show and have your story out there and to touch more lives. I'm looking forward to having you back again. Thank you for spending this hour with us on Inter Vitam at Mortem, Between Life and Death, interviews and discussion with a Catholic bioethicist. Rick, I don't know what to say, but this has been an amazing hour, and I have enjoyed this interview thoroughly. Thank you for the gift you've given my listeners.
My pleasure, and thank you for having me, Marianne. God bless you.
Right. God bless.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.